Hello and welcome everyone. Today we have our first webinar of the year with David Stephenson. He's going to talk to us about his book, which is called Business Skills for Data Scientists, Practical Guidance in 6 Key Topics. He has led global analytics programs for many companies, and he has also served as expert advisor to leading investment, private equity, and management consulting firms. He's going to give you a little introduction as well. And at the end, we're going to have a brief question and answers if you want to ask him anything. So thank you and welcome, David.
Hey, thanks, Isadora. Good to be here. So let me, hopefully you can all see my screen here. And I'm going to give you sort of a bit of introduction into the topic and why we feel it's important. So as Isadora mentioned, I'm going to focus on the business skills for data scientists as opposed to the more technical skills. And it's pretty broad application. I say data scientist, but it's really any analytics professional, whether it's a business analyst or machine learning engineer. People who are trying to really apply some analytic technique in a business setting. Sort of all of you can benefit from this. And if I want to just rewind last year, the Anaconda Software Corporation sent out a survey. Okay, they sent a survey out to several thousand people across the globe, and they asked, among other things, this question. They said, in your opinion, what are the most important skills or areas of expertise that are missing in the data science or machine learning areas of your organization? And it's interesting to see the responses of this. Okay, so what they did is they had about 20 questions grouped into 5 skill sets, as you can see here. Analytics, business skills, computing and engineering, data, and math. So which of these skills, and broadly speaking, are missing in your organization? And as you can see, the skill set that respondents said was most strongly missing in their data science or machine learning programs were the business skills, right? So there's a real need for this across the globe, across the industry. People really perceive that. So in my own experience, I've been working in this field for about 20 years. About 6 years ago, a buddy of mine who's the director of a machine learning company approached me and he said, David, we have a high potential program for our data scientists. We really want to get them trained to produce value in our clients. We've got a lot of the technical trainings. Can you come and help them with the business skills that are needed? Okay, so this was 6 years ago. I started talking to this director, and we started thinking, okay, what are the business skills that we should train your high potential analysts in to really prepare them? So we made a list, we refined it a bit, and we went through it and started refining what those skills are that are most going to be helpful. Okay, this is where I should probably back up a little bit and give you a little more information about my background. Okay, so I did a PhD in mathematics, actually in probability theory with a master's in computer science. So very technical mathematical backgrounds. And I went from there into a job in research and development. So my first job was very mathy, right? Everyone around me was essentially a mathematician or a software developer. So we all thought in pretty much the same way. Okay, so not a big change, not a big adjustment on my part. But the second job I did was more of a Wall Street company. So here I'm working with banks, insurance companies, trying to bring real applied value. And this was a big adjustment for me in my career because math was no longer the end goal of what I did, right? And I was working with people. So 2 things happened. One is the end goal of what I did was business and not math. And the second is I was working with a lot of colleagues who weren't analytical or technical by nature. So I had to adjust how I related to them. This was a big transition for me, even though it seems like it maybe shouldn't have been. Okay. After that, I went into risk management with an insurance company, so very similar. But about 10 years ago, I left the financial industry and I joined eBay Classifieds Group to head up their global business analytics. So this was the second big transition for me in my career, because at this point, I was no longer focused really on technical delivery, but what I was doing is I was using data and analytics to deliver value across the organization. So whether it's helping sales teams, helping product teams, helping analysts, helping strategists, helping FP&A and finance, right? Essentially, what I needed to do is to say, how can data and analytics in some way bring better results for all the different divisions across the company, across the globe? So this is a really big transition for me. It took a lot of adjustment, but really emphasized For me, the challenges of bringing value for business from analytics. Okay, so that was sort of the second major transition. I left eBay about 8 years ago and started off doing independent consulting. So what I do now is I really focus on program development for companies. So there's quite a number of companies that I've helped out, either to launch new analytics programs or to take an existing program and help it move forward very rapidly. So as you can see, some of the companies I've helped are digital natives, and some of them are more traditional companies where they wanted to improve their operations using more modern data techniques or machine learning techniques. So a lot of industries, a lot of locations around the globe. And so what's happened is in these 20 years, I've seen a lot of what can go wrong in companies. Okay. And to be honest, I've made a lot of mistakes myself. So when Jeff approached me about 6 years ago and said, "Can you help me do this business skills training?" I had a lot to think on, a lot of experience to draw on, and a lot of things that I wanted to help other data scientists understand, both to help them be more successful in what they do within a business context, but also to help them avoid some of the pitfalls and mistakes that I'd make or that I'd seen some of my colleagues make. Okay. So we worked on this on the syllabus. We came up with several days worth of training covering several different topics. I delivered these trainings for Jeff's company, and then what I did is continue to develop them and deliver them to more and more companies. Pretty soon, I joined a business program at a top European business school, helped them develop the curriculum for executives who wanted to work in the data sphere. Continued to refine it, get more feedback, and then ultimately published it in the form of this book that Isadora mentions. So what I'd like to do now in the half an hour or so that we have is just give you a quick introduction to what these 6 skills are. There's actually 12 chapters in my book grouped into 6 different skill sets, and they're presented roughly in the order in which you'll need them throughout your careers. So I'd like to kind of just very briefly introduce what they are, give you an idea of them, and give you a few tips in terms of how to start developing them. Okay, good. So the first thing when we think about the skills that you need to produce business value is the skill of really getting in tune with your organization. So why is this especially difficult for an analytics professional? Well, if you think about it, what made you successful as a student in your training? Okay, it's probably that you were able to solve clearly defined problems with near perfect accuracy and then present the results of your work to another expert in the field. Okay, doing this is what really made you successful as a student, as a trainee. Okay, now you move into the business world and really things have changed quite a bit. The questions that you have are no longer well defined. They generally have no right answer. Your stakeholders probably don't trust you, and they certainly won't understand you. Okay, so this is a really different setting for the challenges you have within a business. It's a completely different mentality that you have to have. Okay, you've got to work with unclear problems. You've got to work really hard to understand your stakeholders, and you've really got to build trust. Okay, so it's going 2 ways. It's you understanding the stakeholder, and it's them learning to work with you and to trust you. Okay, so when we see like the new data scientists coming in, especially when I work with trainees who are just out of university, they come into organization and they really struggle to understand how to add value to their organization. Okay, it's often very unclear what's expected of them, how to deliver something useful, and how to earn trust. Okay, so there's really a number of these things that you have to learn pretty quickly. The hope is that you have a manager or a mentor who can help you with these things. But you've really got to pay attention to developing a real tuning into the business and a real working together and building trust. So there's like a dozen, 2 dozen of these things we can just run through in terms of basic business sense that you need to develop that a lot of people have, but analytics professionals typically struggle to get. But let me just give you 4 or 5 examples just to let you understand what I'm talking about. The first example is learning how to deliver value quickly. Okay, why is this important? Well, it builds trust because we're delivering something that our stakeholders understand is valuable. And it builds our understanding of the business because we're getting quick feedback. Okay, so this is a basic technique that we need to really strive on. It's not something we learned in university necessarily, but in a business setting, it's pretty critical. Another example, learn to ask the question behind the question. Okay, I've talked to a lot of data scientists who are frustrated because they feel like data monkeys, where people ask them for data, ask them for something, they give it to them, and then they just ask again for something else. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to get into the habit of whenever the business comes to us with a question, to really understand, okay, why are you asking this question? What's the fundamental business problem behind it? Okay, don't fall into the trap of simply accepting small projects to collect data or perform basic analysis, deliver results, and then get another small project. Okay, but keep asking, what's the reason? What's the bigger question? Okay, become sort of a thought partner with your stakeholders. Another example. Okay, learn to focus on the colleagues who are most open to working with you. A lot of data scientists are really frustrated because they want to do work and their stakeholders aren't willing to accept that work. They're not interested in what the stakeholders have to bring. Okay. But when you learn to not force yourself on the wrong stakeholders, but identify the stakeholders who are most open to working with you, you've got a much better opportunity. Okay. So this is all about leveraging the trust you have rather than abusing the trust that you don't have yet. Okay. Part of this has to do with networking too. So, and this also goes against often the way we are naturally as analysts. As analysts, naturally, we want to sit in our corner and do work. We want to not be disturbed. We don't tend to be as social in general. But one of the habits we really want to develop is learning to meet people. Okay, so as you start in an organization, you're going to get introduced to a few people. Make an effort to get to introduced as often as possible, to find out as much as you can around the people around you. Because as you do this, as you get to know more people, find out what they do, understand their pain points and their needs, you're going to start to identify areas where you can bring value. Okay, but that's because you are getting to know people and understanding their work and eventually identifying the colleagues that are going to be most helpful in presenting business opportunities to you. Another example is what they call eating your own dog food. This is essentially making sure you understand your customers and your products. Okay, as much as possible, use whatever products your company has. So as an example, I did a project a few years ago with a bank. It was a local bank here, and I did not have an account with that bank. Okay, first thing I did when I started the project is I went down to the local office of that bank and I opened an account. Okay, I wanted to be their customer. When I help them with their when I help companies with their marketing campaigns, again, I sign up to all their email distribution lists because I want to get the emails they send so that I can experience what my customer experiences, experience the product that I'm helping develop. Okay, this should be a basic business practice that you always have to better understand the business environment you're working in. Use your company's product as often as possible. And again, this is what we refer to as eating your own dog food. Okay, so these are just a few examples. My point is that there's dozens of these examples, which are sort of best practices, and they're a way for us to level set with our other colleagues and getting a business sense, okay, understanding the context that we work in. As we do those things, as our company sees that we're really interested in understanding what they do, that's also going to build their trust in us. Okay, and this is going to as we work closely with the stakeholders and try and build the trust, we're going to also really have to understand our stakeholders better and better. And this is going to bring us to sort of the next topic of colleagues. Okay, so we're still talking about getting in tune with the organization. The first part is for us to understand the organization as a whole, but the second part is to us to adjust the way we work with different types of colleagues. So you can never work with one department exactly in the same way as you work with other departments. Those of you who've been around for a little while will know what I'm talking about, right? So if I'm working with people in technology, people in finance, people with marketing, or with more senior executives, each of these people have very different ways how they work. They have different goals for their work. They have different values, what they respect in people, and they have different rhythms and environments in how they work. Okay, you have to understand those goals, values, and environments, their priorities and rhythms, and respect them in order to really be successful working with them. And as I said, each department, each type of colleague is going to be different. This is something you'll learn over time as you get feedback from them, but it's also something that you'll learn from, for example, your managers or your peers, if you're really sensitive to it. It'll play out in project management, it'll play out in presentations, it'll play out in a lot of different ways, but it's a business skill related to getting in tune with your organization that you have to be conscious of developing. Good. So that was the first skill, the one of getting in tune with your organization. This is one which sort of level sets you. So by the time you get this skill down, and it's something you should get down in the first year or two of work. Okay, so by the end of 1 or 2 years of actively trying to develop this skill, talking with your manager and more senior colleagues, you should pretty much get to the point where you're more or less in tune with your organization. And at this point, your business colleagues should recognize you as someone who gets it, someone who brings value to the organization. Okay. Not someone who's some analytic person who doesn't bring any value and doesn't understand things. The second skill is a more general skill. This is the interpersonal skills. Okay. These are broad skills that everyone in the organization needs, but they're also skills which are especially challenging for data scientists because of specific parts, but specific ways that we relate to our colleagues. Okay. What'll often happen is you'll be working in a team, especially an international team, and everything seems to be going well, and suddenly there'll be some sort of unexpected conflict within the team, within the company, right? For example, you've got a new colleague who's suddenly taking 2-hour lunch breaks when everyone else is taking 30-minute lunch breaks. Okay. You've got a colleague who quits and they say, look, the reason I'm quitting is my company doesn't respect my family commitments, or I feel like my manager's humiliating me in front of the entire team. They feel like they're being micromanaged. They feel like the motivations are strange. They feel like they're being criticized for reasons they don't understand. Okay. These things sort of often hit people out of the blue, and I've seen this happen quite a number of times. And often the reason this happens is that there's underlying cultural differences that happen within team, especially an international team, where we experience things which we're deeply insulted by or very confused by, and not realizing that these differences are actually strong cultural differences. Okay, so this is where we get into the first interpersonal skill of navigating the cultural differences. Okay, so sometimes some differences seem obvious to us. We say, okay, if someone from America works from someone from China or someone from India, South America, Africa, we assume, okay, there's going to be cultural differences. We may underestimate those. But the truth is there's strong cultural differences even within geographic regions. And I want to illustrate this by comparing Denmark and Greece with you. Okay, Denmark and Greece, both part of the European Union. Okay, so you would think they'd be very similar. But if we look at one example of how to classify cultural differences is called Hofstede's cultural dimensions. There's several frameworks for culture, but this is one that's pretty widely accepted. I'm not going to go into detail on it, but I do just want to illustrate, even for 2 European countries, you can see the drastic difference in the different dimensions, the 6 dimensions of the scale between Portugal and Greece. I'm sorry, between Denmark and Greece. Okay, each one of these 6 dimensions reflects a basic deeply underlying view of the world by those cultures. Okay, and each one of them has potential to really shipwreck a business relationship if they're not navigated correctly. Okay, so you can see the importance of developing an understanding of cultural differences to avoid problems from misunderstandings. So I was in a company once where they actually sent their employees to 2-day cultural trainings to help them with this issue. That's the first skill. The second interpersonal skill is the skill of negotiating. Okay, this is one that I think everyone acknowledges. I'm not going to go into detail on this one. There's several really good books about negotiating, things like Getting to Yes or Never Split the Difference. But we do want to be conscious that even as analysts, we need to develop negotiation skills. And it's not just about negotiating salary. It's also things like negotiating access rights, negotiating roadmaps. Okay, all of these things involve some sort of conflict and negotiation that we want to develop the skill of. Okay. Third thing is office politics. Office politics is, again, one where there's not a lot of information out there. I've written a chapter about it in my book, mostly from personal experience and insights. But yeah, especially difficult for analytics professionals because we don't want to deal with this. We want to just do the analytics, the algorithms, right? But it's difficult to avoid this, especially as you become more senior. So you want at least basic sort of self-defense skills related to office politics, and also some awareness of the currents that are going on. Good. So that's the second, interpersonal skills. So at this point, we're sort of, we should be a little bit self-defense, a little bit business understanding, and we're getting to the point where we're asking ourselves, how can I really push the value that I deliver, especially as I get further into my career, start making presentations, delivering insights, that type of thing. And that's where we get into the third skill, which is how to communicate our insights, especially to a broader audience. Okay. There's going to be two parts of this, and the first is the data visualization. Okay, so this for me is sort of the funnest part of the trainings that I do, and it's the part where people typically get value the quickest. Okay, so if we teach people in half a day, in a day, we can make a huge difference in how we teach analysts to present data in terms of basic techniques, right? So this is a really quick win. I've got 1 or 2 chapters in my book about it. Claire Knopflich has a whole book about it from the business perspective. Stephen Few has like 5 books about it, right? So this concept of data visualization, storytelling with data, great skill to develop. When we look at certain visuals, we know they're bad. Things like, this visual, we know it's overdone. This visual, we know it's extremely confusing, right? So those visuals as data scientists, we know they're bad. But visuals like this, as a data scientist, we feel like this is normal. But in fact, to a non-analyst, a visual like this could be just as confusing as the last 2 that we did. So the challenge is that, in my experience, analytics professionals produce a lot of visuals like this, which are really falling far, far short of presenting clear insights in the way they're supposed to. So we really want to move past that and improve our standards for what we're presenting. Okay. Or we'll produce something like this. It's not a graph or chart, but it's extremely confusing to look at, very cluttered, also does a very bad job communicating. We can look at that and say, okay, I know something's wrong with this, but I'm not sure what. And so what we want to do and what we teach is how to develop some really best practices for producing better visuals. Okay. One of the first principles we want to look at is seeing things from our audience's perspective. So as an analyst, we really have to stretch ourselves to say, how is my audience perceiving what I present to them? Okay. And in fact, there's a lot of ways that we just naturally torture our audiences, right? Completely unnecessarily. So an example is the bar chart here. We do this all the time. And what's wrong with this bar chart? Okay, so you have to turn your head to read it. And we know it's painful to our audience, but we do it anyways. Okay, why is this such a problem? Well, studies have been done on putting your text vertically instead of horizontally. This is actually 205% slower for our audience to read. So we've tried to fix it. We say, okay, I'm going to fix it by making it diagonal. Okay, but we still know this doesn't quite feel right. And in fact, the same studies show that this is about 50% slower to read. Whereas it would be so simple for us simply to give it horizontal labels. Okay. And as we think of this from our audience's perspective, we realize, yeah, the horizontal labels really are much easier to read. Okay. Really small techniques. You may or may not have heard already, a lot of people really discourage people using pie charts. Well, why is that? Again, if I look at this from my audience's perspective and they want to get an insight from this, it's very, very difficult for them to see which is bigger, B or D, because they look about the same in a pie chart. Now, the whole reason for having a graphic is to give instant visual insight. Using this pie chart, I don't have instant visual insight. I might as well just use a table. Okay. Your best practice in this case is to use a bar chart because the bar chart gives you that instant recognition. Yes, B is greater than D. Okay. On the flip side, sometimes I've got situations where the numbers are drastically different and a bar chart would look like this. Again, from the audience's perspective, I ask myself, do you get instant visual insight from my graphic? And in this case, it's no, because the 11, the 8, and the 2, the bar chart's not providing any insight. Okay, so I want to discipline myself and say, what's a better graphic to allow my audience to get an instant insight into my graphic? And in this case, I can see that a two-dimensional square plot chart is going to give me that instant insight in a situation where there's vastly different magnitudes. Okay, so those are some sort of simple best practices that people nevertheless don't use but should. Okay, we want to get our analysts to start using these simple best practices, but more than that, we want to systematically produce better visuals. And to do that, we've got two principles that we teach. The first is to leverage Gestalt principles. Gestalt principles are a way that your mind naturally makes groupings. By leveraging these principles, and there's 6 of them that I typically give in my training. By leveraging Gestalt principles, you're helping your audience get insights, make associations without cluttering your graph. Okay. For example, a Gestalt principle in this graph is that on the left, you naturally know to read the columns vertically, and on the right, you naturally know to read them horizontally. And that's because the subtle thing about the difference is the distance between the dots. Okay, it's closer vertically on the left, and the distance is closer horizontally on the right. So that's an illustration of how Gestalt sends a message. The second principle we want to leverage is pre-attentive processing. Okay, pre-attentive helps us direct our audience to focus on one specific element. In this example, I know where my audience is going to focus. They're going to focus on the yellow car because it's pre-attentive. Okay. Using these types of things, I can systematically declutter my visuals to give a cleaner, easier experience. And I can also do things like create visual hierarchies. So when you read a chart like this, it's pretty, the author of this is pretty confident what order you're going to read this in. And this is because of their use of pre-attentive attributes to create what's called a visual hierarchy. So as a data scientist, you want to really leverage these skills. Okay, you want to create visuals where you've taken control of the visual hierarchy. You've cleaned things up by removing clutter. You've leveraged Gestalt principles to help you reduce the clutter and send a message. Okay, these are all skills which you can learn relatively quickly if you really want to. But when we talk about forming a message, it's more than just designing a slide. It's being really clear about the message you want to deliver. What I see is that really across the business world, people can get deeply into a project without even knowing themselves why they're doing that project. Okay, so if you don't understand your own reason for doing something, it's going to be very difficult to form a message. Okay, so there's 3 aspects to communication. There's the what, the who, and the how. The how is the technique. The what is something which we all need to be clear of with ourselves. It's the message we want to communicate. Okay, we'll produce a slide like this, and I see these very often, where we put all the data we can on one very packed slide. It's a very beautiful slide. It's very well done. It's not cluttered, nice use of colors and everything. But we put a slide like this together, and it's got several messages going on at the same time. Okay, as someone working in a business setting who presents a slide like this, I've really lost control of my message, and you're going to have a bad experience making the presentation. What we want to do in general when we communicate is we want to strip our slides down to single messages very simply. And so when we present it to our audience, there's a clear message and we're maintaining control of that presentation. Okay. We want to understand our own messages well enough that we can deliver a 3-minute elevator pitch when necessary. Whether that's if we run into an executive or a senior manager who asks us about our project, or whether it's something where at the end of the quarter or the end of the year, we're giving a summary of all the different projects we do. Okay, so we need, as analytics professionals, to have the skill of giving a 3-minute version of what our project is for, what the solution we've done, and what the benefit is in the end. Okay, so that's also a skill we need to develop. And as I mentioned earlier, all of these things, whether it's the technique of how to create a slide, or whether it's the elevator pitch, the presentation, the what, all of these things have to be tailored to our audience. Okay, so we have to understand, who is it I'm presenting to? Are they a technical audience who wants the details? Are they an executive audience who needs a very brief, business-focused, strategic level presentation? Or are they sort of middle management who is somewhere in between? Okay. So when we talk about the third skill, communicating insights, there's a lot to that. There's a lot of quick wins, but it's also a lot of work to get that right. Okay, those three skills are the most important skills that you have for sort of the first 5 years of your career. Okay, up to the point where you're participating in presentations, you've got a manager um, to watch over you and such. Once you move into the management stage, we start getting into more challenging skills, the more difficult skills like project management. Okay, and I'm not going to go too deeply into those. I want to save a little bit of time for questions. But essentially, this is at the point where you're going to do stakeholder management. Um, you're going to do things like actually scoping the projects, right? Finding out, how much time should I ask for each part? How do I get the right stakeholders involved? How do I get the resources for the project to make sure I can deliver something? And it's about making sure that end to end, we can bring a project with business value to completion and deliver it. Okay, these are those projects. So there's two parts of it: the scoping at the beginning, and then there's actual delivery. One of the challenges is that we don't take enough time to scope the project thoroughly. Okay, I've seen this quite a bit. Um, and so one of the principles I have, I think it's chapter 9 in my book, is really encouraging people to cover all the bases, as we'd say, cover all the bases with your stakeholders as you're scoping a project. The framework that we have for this is the sort of the 4 conversations framework. And I'm not going to go into this at all, but you can see here, there's about 14, 15 different topics you want to make sure you cover even at the beginning of scoping a project. Okay, so this is something that has to be done. If you miss any of these 14 or 15, that's a potential for your project to fail because something wasn't well thought through at the beginning. Okay, so you've got this skill of really launching the project well, and then you've got the next skill of delivering the project. Okay, once you've sort of set off, you've agreed on what you're going to do to get the project kicked off in the right way. Okay, this is also really critical, getting all the stakeholders on board, agreeing with everyone involved in a project kickoff. Deciding on your delivery, okay, when to create a proof of concept or MVPs, when to iterate, when to release a pilot into production. These types of things are also involved in the stages of bringing your product to delivery. How to manage stakeholders. Okay, the expression we have is herding cats, right? So this concept of herding a cat, where you've got all these different stakeholders in different departments, and I need their contributions to make my project work. Okay, I need technology support. I need the business experts from the marketing team, the database team. I need the executives to let their teams work, or the e-commerce people, right? I need all these different stakeholders involved. And if any of them doesn't deliver what they've committed, my project is going to fail. Yeah, I need to know how to escalate if someone isn't really delivering what they should. How do I go to my manager? How do I go to their manager? How do I apply enough pressure at the right time? Okay, this is all part of the skills you have in terms of managing projects and delivering a project. Okay, this is when you're at the sort of the management level, and then the next stage, sort of the last stage, is the skill of leading a program. Okay, and this is often what I'm doing with my projects. You go to a company, you're the most senior analyst in the company. You have to talk to the CEO and the CTO and say, here's what I think are the best business opportunities. Here's where I think is the sweet spot, given the data and the opportunities you have. Based on where you are in terms of analytic maturity, what do I think are the next items on the roadmap for data and analytics and machine learning? You help the company identify all of those steps and think of the staffing they need for it. Okay, think of the technology they need for it. Okay, it's all part of the program development. Often what you'll do is you'll need to do design thinking. Okay, working in workshops, teams of people from across the company, sitting down with them for a half a day or a full day, and thinking, how can my data science program really benefit the company based on the underlying company needs and strategy. Okay. Um, and as I mentioned, the skill of managing a program involves hiring. It involves managing teams, leading teams, working with vendors to get the right technology, organizing contracts. Okay. This is all a business skill, which as you get more and more senior, you're going to need to develop. Okay. Um, it's not simple. It's not as simple as just hiring a few data scientists. If we look at charts of what's required to deliver end business value, okay, there's quite a number of stages to develop and release a machine learning program within a business environment. Each of those stages has specialized staff necessary, right? So these are staff that you either have to hire, or you have to contract in, or you have to get them somewhere within your company, be involved with them or work with them. Okay. So it can be a pretty complicated process when you're at this last stage of actually managing a data science program, making sure you've got all the resources to deliver ultimately the value. Um, and there's a lot of responsibility. I just want to close with this example. Some of you may have seen this. And when you ask yourself the question, as the leader of a data science program, how much damage can you actually do? Some of you may remember what happened just last year. If you've read the international news, Zillow, which is a property management site, like a real estate, it started off as a real estate listing site in the US, and they moved into this phase where they said February 21, so just really less than 2 years ago, they said, look, we're going to use machine learning and start buying houses with it. Over the course of 1 year, between February 21 and February 22, they lost nearly €1 billion, nearly $1 billion, because essentially they used machine learning in an ineffective way. Some people say they didn't account for model drift. And essentially by using data science in the wrong way, they ended up laying off, losing hundreds of millions, and they needed to lay off a quarter of their staff. So improper management of a data science program can be extremely destructive. That was the fifth skill. I said actually there's 6 skills. The sixth skill is one that really spans your career. Okay, and it's the skill of understanding and managing your own career. It's something you're really going to work with the whole time. Often people ask me this question. They think of it at the beginning in terms of job advancement. They think of it in terms of more salary. As people get further in their career, they think of it more in terms of lifestyle, culture. How can I find a job that fits my needs, fits my preferences? Should I go freelance? Should I stay in a company, academic or non-academic, right? There's a lot of issues involved with navigating your career. This is something I'm sure you've all thought about already quite a bit. It's the last chapter in my book. So I do talk about it, but I'm not going to really talk about it so much now, partly because we're just about out of time, and also partly because it does tend to be pretty specific to who you are, what's important to you, and especially to where you are in terms of stage in your career. Good. So here we are again with the 6 skills in front of you. Let me go ahead and stop now. I know we're close to the end of time, but I want to take a few minutes just to take time for any questions that people might have. Okay. If there are no questions, then I want to thank everyone for joining, and I wish you a good evening or rest of the day, depending on where you're at. And here's my contact email if anyone wants to reach out to me.